Hey guys, what's going on? Obviously 10.2 was announced today, and I now have a job like a peasant, so I wasn't able to kind of watch everything live and, react and make content or whatever, but I just finished streaming and was able to test all of the tank sets on the PTR as best I could and just kind of play around with what they are and what they do. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time kind of giving you just my initial impressions. This isn't really going to be a in-depth explanation. It's a little bit of theory crafting. It's kind of explaining how they do, because some of the text, it seems like they wanted to make the tier sets a little bit more complicated, yet most of them are still pretty passive. So we're going to kind of cover that in this video, starting with the Brewmaster Monk, which is easily one of my favorite sets, and obviously a tank that I've been maining for quite a while now. But let's just jump into it. I'll probably have some footage playing of my testing. I spent a little bit of time testing at training dummies. I spent a little bit of time testing at Ruby life pools. Actually, I just went into a Mythic 0. I know it's not challenging content, being like 450 plus item level. Obviously, mobs aren't really going to be dangerous, but it gives you an idea about how the tier set might interact while actually in combat compared to just hitting a training dummy. So if you're ever looking to get on the PTR testing out some of these tier sets for yourself, I recommend doing that. Is it going to give you the most accurate results? Not necessarily, but it is another way you can actually test those kind of things out. So starting with the Brewmaster set, I like this set a lot because for any of you who remember Keg of the Heavens from Shadowlands, it works similar to that, but in terms of Breath of Fire instead of the Keg Smash. So your 2 set is going to be Breath of Fire deals 20% bonus damage as Shadow Flame, and it causes you to heal for 50% of all fire damage that you deal. We'll get into this in a second, but let's quickly cover the 4 set because it's kind of complicated when you first read it. Your attacks against targets afflicted by Breath of Fire have a chance to deal 10% extra damage as Shadow Flame, and each Celestial Brew cast also grants a staggered absorb for 100% of the Shadow Flame damage that you've dealt, causing damage delayed by stagger to instead be prevented. Now, for any big brain IQ players out there, you'll probably know what that means, but for me, it took me 30 minutes of messing around and people in stream chat telling me what it means to figure it out. But essentially, what's going to happen is while you're in combat and dealing damage while you have Breath of Fire active, you're going to be generating this kind of aura. And when you cast Celestial Brew, you're going to gain a secondary buff that's going to basically absorb the staggered value damage that you're staggering. I don't think that makes a lot of sense, but let's say you got hit for 100k and your stagger is 80% and it's a physical attack. So 80%, you're going to be staggering 80,000 damage, right? Now that shield, instead of you staggering that 80,000 damage, it's just going to get absorbed completely from this other buff from the 4 set, which is kind of cool. Now this is going to be much larger than 400 or 100k in a lot of scenarios, depending on how much damage you're dealing, how big the pull is, and how long you go before actually hitting Celestial Brew. But I will have to do some testing with the size of the shield that it's actually going to gain. But essentially what this is doing is it's giving you passive healing through both Breath of Fire Dot, Dragonfire Brew if you play it, as well as Charred Passions if you're playing that instead, which after testing will probably be the play. Now, the healing, you suffer a lot more in terms of healing if you're playing Dragonfire Brew, though you're going to end up dealing a little bit more damage, it seems like, through the little bit of testing that I've done. There's an interesting thing we tested with Blackout Combo. Now, this does change your rotation a lot. It requires you to go Keg Smash into a Blackout Kick into Breath of Fire, but that initial damage will give you more burst healing. So every time you use Breath of Fire, you're going to be getting a little bit of healing from that if you're playing Dragonfire Brew with Blackout Combo. If you're playing Charred Passions, as you're dealing damage, both with the dot and by, Blackout Kick and Spinning Crane Kick, you're just healing, and it feels really, really good. And when you look at the healing breakdown, the healing from this, called Charred Dreams, ends up being a majority of our healing, like 30% or something like that. So it actually looks really, really good, and it reminds me of, like I said, a lot of Keg of the Heavens. So for people who missed that, you're probably going to enjoy this tier set a lot. Now, looking at the total healing it's actually providing, I think we're probably going to see a nerf in some regard to this because it seems a little bit overpowered, but again, it's hard to test without, Mythic Plus being available currently, but only time will tell. I'll be doing more testing. I'll be doing more of a snapshot kind of analysis video for each tank independently over the next couple of weeks as we kind of get more details. But for now, the Brewmaster set, easily probably one of my favorites. A lot of the other sets here are going to be pretty straightforward. So now we have the Guardian Druid. The Guardian Druid set, they did reign supreme. They've been reigning supreme all of 10.1, sorry. But I think this new tier set's going to fall short. And I think it's the way that it's currently interacting with some of the talents. So in the current meta, you see a lot of people playing, Ursoc's Fury because the absorb value from Thrash and Raise and Maul extremely high. Now, the problem with the tier set is that the absorb value you're actually going to get from the tier set is going to basically Ursoc's Fury takes precedence over this new tier set bonus, meaning that if you're playing Ursoc's Fury in lower level content for the most part, you're not really actually able to absorb the full value and get the damage from it. So it ends up only being like a 1 to 2% damage and healing increase, and losing our 4 set from last tier, it's going to make Bear look a little bit weaker. But let's quickly go over what the set does. So 20% of your damage and healing and 100% of the armor you gain during Rage of the Sleeper will fuel the growth of the Dream Thorns, which is going to be an aura that you'll have. After Rage of the Sleeper expires, you're going to absorb 10% of damage that's dealt to you while the Thorns remains active. This is a 30-second buff. So basically, think of this like Treemouth's Festering Splinter or, N'Zoth's Psychic Shell way back from BFA. Basically, while the shield persists, it's basically a 10% DR until it's fully consumed. Now, the 4 set bonus is for every 40 rage you spend while Rage of the Sleeper is active, it's going to extend the duration by 1 second up to 5. So it's basically extending the duration of your Rage of the Sleeper, which is, just great all around. Your Dream Thorns becomes Blazing Thorns, causing 10% of the damage that you absorb to be reflected at the attacker. So it's just additional Thorns value damage. Now, the problem with this is, first, you have to play Rage of the Sleeper. Now, most people do, but for people who, are a little bit more loosey-goosey, I guess is the proper term, with their talents and don't necessarily confine to what the meta is, and you don't play Rage of the Sleeper, that means you don't get a 2 set bonus or a 4 set bonus. So you pretty much have to play Rage of the Sleeper. And like I said earlier, Ursoc's Fury shield takes precedence, meaning that if you have a shield active, the Dream Thorns aren't going to be consumed, or the Blazing Thorns. And on top of that, even on large pulls with Incarnation going and you're spending a ton of rage and you're gaining a bunch of Iron Fur, which is armor and healing, you're going to end up having this shield for 30 seconds, or at least a 10% DR. That's strong, but when you have a shield for 1.5 mil and it's only absorbing 10% of each attack, at least in the Mythic 0 Ruby life pools that I tested, I was barely cracking 100k on the absorbs. Again, it's a level of content that I was testing it in, but pretty shit. Which means that you might have to play off of Ursoc's Fury, which there aren't similar talents in terms of power. So it puts Guardian Druid in like a weird spot where it's like, you don't want to play Ursoc's because it hurts the tier set, or you play Ursoc's, but then the tier set really doesn't matter because Ursoc's Fury Absorb is being counted first. So it just feels clunky, and after losing our 2 and 4 set bonus from Season 2, Bear will probably feel a little bit weaker. Now, obviously, when you take into account secondary stats and new weapons and just higher item level in general, Bear will probably be in the same spot, but will it be meta going into next season? As of right now, I can't really see that, but again, we have to see testing first. But overall, not a huge fan of this tier set because you can really feel the damage loss and the healing loss. And it feels like the tier set buff that you're getting isn't going to impact your gameplay at all. Anyways, moving on to Prot Warrior. So the Protection Warrior set is, I think, pretty cool. It's one of my favorite sets up there with Brewmaster, but once I explain it, you're probably going to understand why there might be some complications with it. And not complications, but it's very catered to single target. So spending Rage has a chance to cause your next Shield Slam to consume your bleeds on a target, instantly dealing 100% of the remaining damage and reducing the target's damage dealt to you for 10 seconds. So right off the rip, it's only on the target that you're shield slamming. So the DR value of this is really only in single target, as well as kind of the damage amp. So when you do, in single target, when you consume those bleeds, it's instantly doing all that damage right away. And then you're going to reapply your bleeds almost immediately through things like Devastator, Revenge, Thunderclap, applying Rend, and of course, Thunderous Roar. Now the 4 set, so for each bleed effect consumed, your target will then deal 2% less damage to you on top of the 10%. So on average, you're going to have like a 14% DR, but if you also have Thunderous Roar on the target, it's going to be 16%, if that makes sense. And then when Shield Slam does consume a bleed, the cooldown of Thunderclap is reset, and the cooldown of Thunderous Roar is reduced by 1 second. So what you're getting is a lot more CDR on your Thunderous Roar, and it's instantly reducing Thunderclap every time you happen to reset a bleed, which typically happens throughout my testing every other Thunderclap, which is just something to kind of keep in mind. Now, in terms of talents, what's interesting about this is it might shift some of our build. we possibly might play a little bit more into Bloodthorn because that damage is going to have 20. The damage is being increased by 20% over the duration. Now, when that's being snapshotted, you're going to have a little bit more burst damage. So Bloodborne is a potential candidate in this new kind of meta and play. We'll have to see those still. Again, just PTR testing first day, as well as playing all of the Thunderous Roar talents. Now, there have been builds that have either played Uproar for, more consistent roars every minute, or you play Thunderous Words to have the more damage, and it increases the bleed effects during, the duration. You could play both, and you're probably going to see Thunderous Roar probably get reduced down to like a 50-second cooldown to 45 seconds. Or if you don't play Uproar, you'll probably see it at like a 110 down from a 130 over the duration. So that opens up a talent point, allowing you to either still play Shockwave or playing Unstoppable Force. Now, a thought that I had is because you're getting resets on your Thunderclap anyways from shield slamming, you might not even need to play Unstoppable Force. Just an idea that I kind of had. So I was kind of messing around with some of these capstone talents, playing around with, still taking Shockwave or whatnot. You could technically drop one-hand spec, but I don't think you'd ever want to do that because you're losing out on, the 5% damage from your weapons as well as the leech value. It's kind of a cool thing. Now, again, we are moving away from the Season 2 tier set, so no more Bolster most likely. But with higher haste values, playing into the fray, enduring defense, you're probably going to still have plenty of shield block uptime, so we're probably not too worried about Bolster. So just kind of an interesting tier set. Now, again, the problem really comes down to the idea of single target. The DR that you're going to be getting from the bonus is only going to be applied to the target you're shield slamming. Now, of course, you can tab target, but let's all admit that's probably going to be pretty annoying and very min-maxy. Not every player is going to want to do that, but the counter argument or playing devil's advocate there is that not every Mythic Plus pull, or not even most pulls in a dungeon, don't really have a mob that's threatening to the tank specifically, or if there is a mob that's dangerous for the tank, there's typically only 1 to 2 of them, so you can kind of target between them. But the damage, as you can see here, is extremely high, and it feels really fun to just see this massive damage burst. And it's just consuming your bleed, then you're instantly reapplying it, and then your shield slam is just consuming the bleeds again. And it's just a really fun kind of spec to play. I think it'll feel a little bit better in Ray than it will in Mythic Plus, but again, time will tell. Once Mythic Plus testing opens up, or if there's any changes, again, I'm going to be doing more of an in-depth video on all of these tanks. Next, we have the Blood Death Knight, and the Blood Death Knight it feels like they're trying to kind of play into the Season 1 set as well as the set bonus from Shadowlands, and let me quickly read that, and then I'll kind of talk about why. So, consuming a Bone Shield charge has a chance to cause your next Hard Strike to apply Ashen Decay, reducing damage dealt to you by 10% and increasing the damage you deal to the afflicted target by 20% for 8 seconds. So basically it's going to be a small damage increase on the target affected, and as well as a DR, similar to some of these other sets like you just saw in the Protection Warrior. The 4-set bonus, it's Soul Reaper's execute damage and Abomination Limbs damage applies Ashen Decay to all enemy targets, and Heartstrike and Blood Boil's direct damage extends Ashen Decay by 1 second. So basically, during your cooldown window with Abomination Limb, you're going to just be having Ashen Decay on everyone and everything, and you're going to just be constantly extending it, getting into that Abomination Limb, Dancing Rune Weapon, Heartstrike, Blood Boil spam that you're used to. The burst potential there is really, really high. It feels really good. But the problem that I mostly have with this set outside of the cooldown for the 4-set is that it's not often you're getting the proc. I feel like they need to up the proc chance a little bit of the Bone Shield being consumed. And then the other problem with that is based on the dungeon pool and the damage profile of certain keys, you're not always dropping Bone Shield charges, and sometimes even using Tombstone, which drops 5, still doesn't grant you Ashen Decay. Also, to apply Ashen Decay to multiple targets, you need to be sending in, your Death and Decay on the ground and Heart Striking, which means you need active runes, and you have a positional requirement. So, I mean, that's kind of the story with Blood DK. They've always been that kind of tank. Same with Protection Paladins that, require to kind of stay in their, in their area in a confined space. But this tier set kind of dips into that, and I'm not a huge fan of it, but as any of you who know me, I'm just not a huge fan of Blood Death Knight in its current states. It's fun, but again, my tank, for example, on PTR is still 413. This isn't even like Season 1, basically, Mythic gear. I'm still, wearing, questing gear and stuff. So testing this was a little bit odd because I don't have those secondary stat values that you might look for. But overall, the tier set looks great. But I think in terms of the tier set bonus, you're going to be very strong in certain situations when you're pulling really big and you're consuming a bunch of Bone Shield charges consistently. But when you're in a fight like, looking back at Shadowlands, a good example was like Medivh and Upper Karazhan. You're not breaking Bone Shield charges outside of Tombstone, so it's going to be hard to maintain that Ashen Decay buff in single target. But again, benefit of this set, Abomination Limb feels fucking great. It feels super bursty. You have good snap threat now with this cooldown. You're obviously gripping everything in, you're generating Bone Shield charges, and you're just applying Ashen Decay to everything. So you're taking less damage by a lot. 10% is pretty big for a Blood Death Knight. And then you're doing 20% more damage. So really cool set, but probably like I would say it's pretty mid. And then speaking of mid, let's jump over to the DH. So the tier set for the DH is kind of disappointing, I would say. It's based around your Sigil of Flame and spending Fury. So you're going to more than likely lean away from that Fiery Brand build and playstyle that we've seen in Season 2, which was fun, but can be a little bit taxing mentally to have to kind of play this managing minigame. Now, some people do like it, playing around with Fiery Brand, making sure you're applying it to the right targets, maximizing the extension and the spread of it, Revel in Pain, whatnot. But with the Vengeance You May DH this season, it's going to be based around applying Sigil of Flames and then getting as much Fury Dump as possible to increase your max health as well as your damage, and maintaining that buff. So it's another maintenance buff, but in a different way. So your 2 set bonus is when you attack a target afflicted by Sigil of Flame, your damage and healing are increased by 2%, and your stamina is increased by 2% for 8 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. Now this does extend. It doesn't like they aren't separate individual like auras. So when you do attack an enemy, it's going to shoot up to 5, and then it's going to stay there until Sigil of Flame debuff wears off on that target, and then it's going to start counting down basically. So the idea is that you want to spam Sigil of Flame, so you can, I'll appease this guy. So you can spam Sigil of Flame basically, so you can max your damage and health and hopefully maintain that aura permanently. So your 4 set bonus is Sigil of Flame's periodic damage has a chance to flare up, shattering additional soul fragments from a target, dealing 10,000 roughly additional damage. Each Fury you spend reduces the cooldown of Sigil by 1 second. So the idea is you basically want to Sigil, spend a bunch of Fury to get Sigil off of CD, just so you can then spend it again. Damn, that Rogue Burst was insane, bro. I'm still not dead yet, homie. This guy will kill me eventually. There we go. When you kind of start thinking about the talent tree, you're probably going to shift back to a Spirit Bomb build. Now, the talent tree I've pulled up, again, is not... It's kind of what I just played with. You'd probably try to go back to, like, Soul Crusher. But at first I was like, okay, let's try to optimize and maximize our Fury generation. So I was thinking, like, Flames of the Fury, or Flames of Fury, maybe for, like, dungeons. But I don't think that Fury gen is actually going to equate to much. I think more than likely you might play Fellblade, which would be kind of interesting because it immediately generates 40 Fury, allowing you to basically Soul Bomb immediately, or Spirit Bomb, sorry, immediately, or go right into a couple Soul Cleaves, which is also going to be good. Now, with my current gear, I'm only like 436 item level, roughly. I do have a good bit of haste, but being a little bit lower item level, you can probably get it to where you can almost permanently maintain this buff. But at this item level, basically the buff falls off right as I have Sigil of Flames active again. So basically you're going to be hitting Sigil of Flames much more often to try to maintain this. But what is really cool about this set is even outside of meta, you're going to be constantly above like 1 million health just base. And then once you're in Metamorphosis, you're at like 1.5, 1.6, 1.7. I could even see us getting close to 2 mil this patch unless they do another health nerf for some reason. Kind of a cool set. If you were able to somehow extend the buff with enough haste, again, I need to probably do some, more testing and trying to get my item level a little bit higher. But as of right now, you don't really need to think about it. You just want to spend as much Fury as possible, but you're just going to Sigil on cooldown. You're going to have a little bit more health, and you're going to deal a little bit more damage. But outside of that, it's really boring, and it's going back to just a playstyle that isn't as interactive. I think the Fiery Brand, while it's a little bit like it's engaging in a way that actually makes it probably more enjoyable than just playing Spirit Bomb and spamming Sigil of Flame. So I'm not a big fan of this set necessarily, but again, we have to do some future testing and figure out how good it's actually going to be. Last but not least, we have the Protection Paladin. So the I haven't played Prot Paladin this tier. Most of the Paladin gameplay that I've done, I've been playing Holy Paladin. So unfortunately with my testing, I'm in intellect gear. I'm wearing Rashok's Molten Heart. I have an intellect weapon on. Not super great. But anyways, the tier set bonus is kind of interesting. And at first, when I first read it, I was like, man, this is going to be shit. But after playing with it, I think it's actually kind of cool. So here's what it does. Your Judgment grants a stack of Sanctification, if I even said that right. Increasing your armor by 1% per stack. Upon reaching 10 stacks, your next cast of Consecration is empowered, increasing its damage and healing by 200% and its radius by 30. Sanctification stacks are reset when your empowered consecration ends. So the foresight bonus is while you're within your empowered consecration, your abilities have a chance to deal 20% bonus damage or healing as fire. Now it seems like it's pretty much, it's not really a chance. It's pretty much everything you do will do additional damage and healing, which is kind of dope. So it's basically a 20% damage increase roughly every 40 seconds. Now, again, with certain levels of haste, with certain levels, like with lust in a raid environment, with probably a different talent setup, you could probably get this down to 30 seconds. But throughout my testing, I was getting an empowered consecration roughly every 40 seconds and trying to hit judgment basically on cooldown. Now, what's kind of cool about this is if you run the 45-second divine toll, you can have divine toll burst for pretty much every single one. So in Mythic Plus, this could be really powerful. You drop an empowered consecration and then you hit divine toll and you just like actually just rip into mobs. Same thing with like maybe playing, Bastion of Might or Bastion of Light. That could offer a lot of burst potential as well. So it's kind of cool in that sense. The only major issue I have is, unlike some of these other tier sets, this one is going to take a lot longer to ramp up because you can't fast track it by having, bone shield charges consumed. It's not based on like holy power you spend. It's simply based on judgment, which doesn't really have any way to, any agency to fast track that. So it's going to be roughly every, 30 to 40 seconds, meaning that you're going to have to optimize and kind of plan around your judgment spending. You're not going to have as much burst damage on pull, but when you do have a consecration empowered, an empowered consecration ready and active and a pull's about to end, you can bank that, use it on the next pull for some big burst damage, or you have to be doing a high enough key to actually utilize it. And the only other major problem I have is if you do happen to replace the consecration down on top of it, you're just going to lose the buff. So there is kind of this there's like a slight skill ceiling in being able to not overlap that consecration and really milk out the damage there, and obviously not run out of it. So it has a kind of like, there's a cool aspect to it, but I think the ramp up time takes too long. And I think the chance of you accidentally replacing your sanctification buff is a little too high for the average player, in my opinion. So most of the testing I did was just on training dummies, nothing too specific. Similar thing with the Blood DK. It's going to kind of require you to be in your consecration to have the buff, but I think it's kind of thematic. We haven't really had a set, at least in a very long time since I've been playing Paladin, that's based around consecration. So I think it's pretty cool for the most part. I would probably rank this up there near like a little bit maybe below Warrior, probably like my third favorite tier set out of the 6. But it's good. I think it's okay. But I'll have to be doing more testing. I'll kind of get in depth and into detail to see how much I can optimize the buffs in the near future, like I've said before. So let me know what you guys think about the tier sets below. Which ones are your favorite? And of course, with new news about WoW coming out and the season kind of getting to the end, you'll probably see a lot more videos from me. So look out for videos about the tier sets. I have a 0 to Hero challenge finishing up now, and I'm also doing a hardcore challenge as well. So you'll get to see all that very soon. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.